Hey, David Brewster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Aerosmith. And of course, we're going to be talking about Joe Perry and Brad Whitford. And Aerosmith formed in Boston, Massachusetts in 1970. And they're kind of viewed as the American version of the Rolling Stones, which I kind of agree with that comparison. And right out of the gate, they basically released their first album that had Dream On, which was a huge hit, put them on the map, right at the beginning. And they went on to release a ton of influential albums and popular songs and influenced, hundreds, if not thousands of musicians. Bands like Guns N' Roses, The Black Crowes, Extreme. Even James Hetfield from Metallica has admitted, the early Aerosmith kind of influence on him and his music, which that's really interesting to notice, this, hugely successful band, but then all the musicians and bands that band influenced. I have seen Aerosmith in concert a couple times, and it was back in the 90s. And the music in this lesson is going to come from 70s Aerosmith, because I feel like the 1970s is the best, decade for Aerosmith. No offense to the 80s, 90s, and everything after that. But there's something magical about Aerosmith in the 70s. It just has this really raw and biting sound. There's elements of blues and funk and all these different things happening. Really cool music. And I know the first time I saw Aerosmith, I was so confused because I figured out what side of the stage, Joe Perry was going to be on. And I kind of positioned myself over on his side. And it was a general admission show, so I could kind of, make my way over there. The concert started, Joe came out, I'm watching him. And then it was like every other song, there was this wicked guitar solo that Joe didn't play that was coming from the other side of the stage. And of course, that was Brad Whitford. And I kept looking over at Brad, just so confused. And I thought, man, I had no clue that Brad was playing some of those leads. I thought it was all Joe Perry. And so then I'm watching the concert and just completely confused because, Joe was kind of the mess and Brad was kind of the finesse. But then together, their guitar styles really complemented each other. And it was a great experience to kind of see that. Like, wow, I had no idea. The opening, that was Mama Ken from their first album. And I used to play this in a cover band, years ago. Great song. So it has this really bouncy, energetic sound, which I like. And a lot of Aerosmith, especially the early stuff, had that, high energy and that powerful, kind of sound. And with the chord riff, really, we're just moving an E power chord and then grabbing part of D. It's kind of like D over E right there. And then do the same thing for B. So it's kind of an A over B right there when you lift up that top part of the B power chord. Like that. And then right here, it's an A power chord. You're going to reach up and grab that G note. And then you're going to also emphasize this A over on the G string right there on the second fret. Like that. So it's melodic, even though it's just based around a chord, but you hear that note kind of move. Like that. And then just bounce along this kind of boogie woogie E. And then do all that again. Next up, we have the song Draw the Line from the album with the same name, and it looks like this. Now, I've seen this song written a couple different ways. I've also seen it played down here. And you can definitely do it that way. I just prefer to do it all in one position right there. And I used to play this in a cover band, and I just slowly morphed the guitar part into that single position idea. So that's a little unusual to play the open A and then climb up on the low E string chromatically like that. So that might take a little while to get used to it, especially compared to this. This is much easier. So this is just my own mutation of the song, but I think it works right there. Because right there you've got this. So it's like an A5 and then it converts to A7. And you could definitely do it right here. But I prefer doing it that way. And then you're right there for that E power chord. Right up next is Same Old Song and Dance from Get Your Wings, a classic riff, and it looks like this. And I love that kind of swinging, you know, single note riff. And that's really clever because you're basically playing an E power chord. And it's kind of changing to E7 right there because you're playing the open D string. And then you're going to play the open A and D, so that's implying a D chord. So you're kind of hitting E and then kind of an implied, you know, D5 and then back to E. But you're also flirting with E7 in there too, which is really crafty. And then just grab that E power chord and bang it. Next is the title track from Toys in the Attic, and it looks like this. It's very simple, but I like the fact that it's just, you know, it's racing and it's really fast. And you're just kind of blurring through this single note line that kind of implies E7. Like that, you're just kind of flying through that. And then just the D, you know, D power chord to an A power chord. And then do that riff again. And once again, it has that real bouncy sound that's pretty common in a lot of Aerosmith songs. Right, up next is the intro to Dream On, and this is a big one because I remember when I was in high school, I found a transcription of it in a guitar magazine. I think it was Guitar World, and it was the one with Van Halen on the cover. I think it had Eric Gales in the issue, and I believe Finish What You Started was like one of the transcriptions, and they also transcribed Dream On. I think there was another song in there too. But it's funny how you remember like a certain guitar magazine or issue that helped you, or something that you learned, you know, something from, where it's like, yeah, I remember that issue. And for some reason, I always associate Dream On with that guitar magazine because that's how I learned the song. But I do know it really opened up my eyes to chords and doing things differently, you know, beyond power chords or bar chords or basic, you know, major or minor chords. And when I heard those chords and then learned the parts, I was, you know, I was mesmerized. I was like, whoa, that's so cool. And I'd already, you know, been exposed to Van Halen's chord vocabulary and sus chords and partial chords and stuff like that. But when I learned Dream On, it really opened like a different door, you know, in my understanding of chords. And it was this. Famous opening, you know, it's like an F minor over C, and then C minor, and then you're gonna flip those two, and that's gonna become a C augmented sus2, and then a C5 flat 9 right there. which is such an unusual, tonality. That series of chords, that's almost more like classical or jazz, than a rock song. And then there it moves up, back to that F minor over C, and then you're going to move to an F sus4 over C, and then a C sus4 right here. So it's interesting how that whole transition takes place just on those top 3 strings. Really interesting. There's a lot you can learn from kind of tapping into that world of, mapping out chords and playing, chord progressions and parts. You can see I switched over to my Strat, and now we're going to be tuned down a half step for these last 2 examples. And the next example comes from Back in the Saddle, which is from the album Rocks. And Rocks is one of my favorite, Aerosmith albums. It really does rock. But Back in the Saddle is interesting because Joe used a baritone guitar. I think it was actually a Fender 6. And I've played this song in, some kind of garage bands or cover bands, and I don't have a baritone guitar. So I always noticed like the transcriptions of the song looked strange, written, and, I tried playing some of the guitar chords, like that, which was way too high. It just didn't sound right. So then this is basically a way you can play the intro to Back in the Saddle on a standard tuned guitar, and it still sounds like the album. Something like this. Now, right there, you can see we're actually playing, these interesting chords. And I'm hearing some of these chords slid. You could also do that as a pull-off if you wanted to. But I kind of like sliding into those notes. Like that. It sounds more like the album to me. But that would basically be an A flat 9 to an A5, like an A power chord. There's your flat 9 right there, that B flat. And you're just pulling that back to A. Or you could pull off too. And then right here, you're going to basically imply A7, and then it's going to move to an A minor 7. So it's almost the same thing, just in a different position. And then you're going to move up a little bit higher, and there's A5 to an A flat 5. And then go back to that A7, A minor 7. And then do it again. Now I typically throw in some of those extra, open A strings, and you kind of hear like that gallop, some of that kind of stuff in the background. I just sprinkle that in there if I'm playing it by myself. If I have another guitarist with me, then obviously one of us can play the chords and the other one can start galloping around on the strings. But it's going to move through that cycle of chords. And then eventually you're going to hear this, and that's just the D flat 9 to a D5. And it almost gives it this like kind of classical like pulse or whatever at the end. Really interesting. The last example comes from Last Child, and this is also from the Rocks album. And this is my favorite Aerosmith song. Last Child just funks out and rocks. There's just something about this song. Really cool stuff. So the intro has all those mysterious, spooky chords. And there's a D minor add 9 over A. Really cool. And then E minor 7 over G. And that's going to move up to this, and that's basically an E7 over B. And then you hear that E7 move to F7 to F sharp 7. And then this, really, the part I played after that's kind of a composite of both guitar parts together, because I believe there's one just doing this. Another one's grabbing that E9, kind of funk chord. And then when you put those together, you can kind of make, a version of those two guitar parts at the same time on one guitar, which I'm a pretty big, fan of doing that type of thing, especially if I'm the only guitarist in the group, or I'm trying to cover, multiple parts at the same time. Sometimes you can kind of combine parts together and find a way, of kind of, playing two parts at the same time, just like that. Right? So think about that the next time you kind of approach a song. You might be able to find a way to combine, a couple parts together. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Aerosmith, and I'm definitely a big fan, this greasy, kind of dirty grit rock with some funk and blues and all these different elements at play. Great band, phenomenal group, and definitely, Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World are huge Aerosmith fans, so if they like it, then I like it too. And there's just something about their music, it's gone on for decades and decades. It started in the 70s, but people still talk about and listen and respect Aerosmith even today. And that says something, about their longevity and their influence and their popularity, because they're definitely a very important American rock band, and I respect them, big time. Not really a big fan of their more recent music that they put out, but 70s Aerosmith rocks. It's awesome. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.